Owner families that have struggling students, what are some strategies that you've heard from them or that you suggest for them to try out? Just to say, well, don't prejudge this, or both for the student or the parent, on how to maybe launch into something that may seem a little taxing or scary to start.
Yes. So I think there's two different kinds of struggles. You could have your child just struggles with the topic in general, and then you also have your child's resistant to the topic.
Mm-hmm.
Which
Yes.
you're like, you could do this, but you don't want to do.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the first one first. So
Okay.
if your child is just struggling, so let's say some of your kids are picking up on the foreign language and you have one that's struggling and maybe not saying things back as much. For this kind of thing, you're still using the phrase in your home. It's part of your life. And so just having that peace inside, knowing like that you taught your kids one language, they can learn a language, right? If they've done that, just knowing like, yes, I mean, there's some school districts out there who they only expect 50% of their students to pass a foreign language. Right. And that would be me like, oh, I hope half my kids learn to talk as long as there's no extraneous circumstances.
Right.
And I expect my kids to talk, and you should expect that with a foreign language too. Mm-hmm. And so just having that piece, like, yes, it will come. And then also, instead of focusing on immediate results, focusing on having fun. So pull away from that and do that. And then really this sometimes you as the parent are the one who's making your child struggle. I know that's hard to stomach.
It is, but it is true, and it needs to be said.
Yes, and I'm guilty. I'm not, I've said things. I'm like, oh, I did not encourage that.
Right.
But just looking at it and being and it can often be like one of the ways you're making your child struggle is that you're just doing way too much, and maybe you should just do one thing, and you should be celebrating that one thing. So instead of focusing on mistakes and being like, oh, that wasn't right, or you said that wrong, or you missed that, you're like, you talked, yes, because when your baby says their first word and they're like, ball, and you're like, oh, they said ball, right? You're making a big deal.
Exactly.
And your parents are excited. But for some reason, when it's like foreign language time, people are like, no, not good enough. That's not what it is, blah, 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 right? And so really pulling away from results versus celebrating everything can be really helpful as a parent. And then also when your child does say something wrong or it just sounds terrible, just modeling back the correct language. So you might open the app to hear the native speaker audio and just hearing it. And then also taking that piece, like, I know it takes time. I know that this is going to help and be really good. And so then you're not discouraging your child. I'm somebody who, like, surprisingly so, I do not like crafts. They give me so much anxiety because I would go to like these church groups and we do a craft and people would be like, oh no, Adelaide, like this. No, not like that, like this. This is it, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, when you're doing something new, you don't want people like constantly correcting you. You're going to shut down, which kind of moves us over to the resistant learner who has just kind of been shut down so much that they're like, I don't want to do this. Or we'll see it where like the parent knows a lot of the language. And so they're like talking at their kid instead of getting on the same page and being like, oh, we're going to work on these two things. When I say, like, I'll say, are you hungry? ¿Tienes hambre? And your response is tengo hambre, right? We're going to start using that and just going over it and making sure it feels good. And you're celebrating it as it happens. Can be really helpful. If your child is super resistant, it could just because they need to observe first. They don't want to just jump in and talk. And so I love the inspire, don't require kind of thing. And so if you're just like, I love this, like, I'm in it. I'm in this for me. Like I have been doing
Right.
Korean in my home because I grew up in a part of Los Angeles that a lot of people were from Korea. And so nobody in my family is like, I want to learn Korean also, Mom. That sounds great. But I'm like, this is awesome. Our program just came out with some of the Korean. And so I'm like, I got food from a Korean restaurant. I had us watch a Korean. Well, I watched a Korean. I only ordered the food for myself and my husband, not even for my kids, because I don't want to hear them complain.
Right.
And so like I ordered the food and I'm watching this Korean drama on Netflix to like, I'm loving everything, right? And my kids come up, they're like, what is this food? And I'm like, oh, I ordered it from a Korean restaurant. And they're like, well, can we try some? And I'm like, I really like it, so I don't know if I want to share. So then they're having it, right? And they're like, oh, this is really cool. And then a couple weeks later, I ordered on DoorDash, or not DoorDash, on Instacart, I ordered all of our food from the Asian grocery store. And I was like, let's try this and this. So we got like little seaweed packages. Everyone was eating it because I'm just like, this is awesome. And then I am the one who's like, as I'm doing my hair in the morning, I'm like listening to the Korean phrase, like, "Bagopa, are you hungry?" And I was doing it. And then my sister-in-law, I was showing it to her. And then my child one of my kids was supposed to be in bed. And he's under my bed. I didn't know it. And he like pops out from underneath and he goes, "Bagopa," which is I'm hungry in Korean. And I never taught it to him, never, not once. But he was like, I'm because they're not supposed to eat after dinner. That's like a hard rule in our house. But he's like, maybe if I say this in Korean, my mom will get through.
Exactly.
And so like
bonus points.
Yeah, so just like me bringing that energy and that like fun to it, that's something that they had no intention of doing it, they'll do.
Right.
And I see that with German. My older child, he would much rather speak German than Spanish. Not because we hate Spanish, but just because like, I love German so much. And then once we did another trip, we went to Mexico for a couple months and I was using Spanish the whole time. It was so fun that now he's like, okay. And they'd order their own food in Spanish and doing that. And so that too in itself, and I know we can't travel as much right now, but also having a trip planned tied to it.
Yes.
Can make it so fun because then your child can see, oh, this works. And it could even just be a trip to a Mexican restaurant.
Yes, exactly.
And you can use your Spanish, or a trip to, a restaurant where there's native speakers. It can be really fun and they can see it happens. But